people who groom children use secrets as boundary crossing behaviors. Like, I'm gonna give this to you, but like, you don't need to tell your like mom and dad, right? If you haven't been through something like this, it's really important to give the space and the respect and the care in the way that you know how to a person whose lived experience involves this. No healthy grown-up needs you to keep a secret for them, period.
Every room that I've witnessed you walk into, it seems like the world tangibly changed around you for the better. And I think you're making the world a safer, better place for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That is really kind. Thank you.
Of course. The first thing I want to get into is the tone around these conversations, because even in wording any of this, I find myself tripping over words and just trying to figure out what the proper term is to use for each thing. So What is the proper tone? Is this conversation supposed to be very low energy, high energy? We're making a huge impact on the world, or like maybe you shouldn't talk about it? What's the right tone here?
You know, it's such a good question to frame a conversation like this, because I approach scary topics from the perspective of we get to have these conversations, not we have to have these conversations. Like, there is a privilege that exists in being part of something that says we need to have these conversations and talk about this tough stuff so that we're in a position where we continue to create a safe space. So I look at it, even when we're talking about really scary stuff, and sexual abuse is scary, and grooming is scary, and learning about all this stuff as like, I don't even know how old, you don't even need to tell me, but
22.
how old you were when when you first heard me, you were what,
18 or 19,
right?
18.
It feels overwhelming and scary, but I always look at conversations like this where like we have an opportunity to have a ripple effect on the world and to change things in a meaningful way about topics that no one wants to talk about. So do we joke about it? Like, we don't joke about it, but does that mean that we can't use humor if there's a way to be able to engage meaningfully? Does it mean that we can't be calm? Like, we don't have to have beating hearts to have this conversation,
we're not in court.
You're not being cross-examined. So I think it's a great question. I don't know if there's a specific answer. I think you engage and you recognize that the words that you share can be heard by people who are survivors of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And I think that we take the greatest care that we can to make sure that we're not causing more damage and we're only doing good.
So I think a lot of, even what you just said, maybe to you, the mind of a survivor is a little more understandable. You've worked with just a lot of these cases. But to me, I hear that and I'm like, I don't know what to do now, because that's dangerous territory. I know nothing about it and I'm just going to mess up. So I want to stay away from it. And I'm getting the sense that, well, first of all, because the stats that I've seen online and some that you said were pretty accurate are staggering. Something like 1 in 4 people or 1 in 5 people have been abused as a child. And I'm walking into rooms, seeing people that have gone through this, seeing people that have done this, and I'm just not noticing that at all. So I think they're just pieces that we're missing. Part of this is we're scared to talk about these things, and then there's so many reasons. It feels like it's bad for everyone when it gets talked about. Everyone involved wants it to kind of stay hidden, and then it leaves someone who's never gone through it just totally in the dark and with very little action to take and very little understanding of how to support people. I got off track and I'm not sure exactly where I was going, but I want to say that my goal for this conversation is for myself to know what action to take and to be able to support people. And hopefully we can frame it that way.
I'd also like to know what's going wrong. Like, what's not working in the world? Why is this happening?
Well, I think, okay, so those are two very big things, right? Those are not the same thing. I think the first thing is, I think you started by saying something like, I don't know, like when I'm walking into a room, like, I don't know what to do or how to engage or how to talk with someone, right? But the truth is that survivors of sexual violence and sexual abuse are in every room that you're in. Just like you said, you do know how to talk to them. right? They are people who have been through traumatic things in life, and it doesn't mean that they can't engage with you in a way that you might never know. I think the real question is framing it from the perspective of, how do we not cause more harm? Right? Like, how do we do no harm? How do we do more good? How do we raise our awareness enough? Not that we're staring at everybody when we're sitting around a table or in a room with them saying like, are you a survivor? Are you a survivor? Like, which you're not gonna, are you somebody that sexually abuses people? Are you somebody that, you're not gonna frame your life that way. But it's about recognizing that even a podcast like this is doing tremendous good. Is there somebody that is listening to this who in some way it will help shape the way that they engage with the world, where they, think about this in a meaningful way, where they change something, where they stretch their mind in some way, right? I think a piece of showing up when it comes to this topic is recognizing there's a lot that people don't know, and every person's lived experience who is the survivor of sexual violence or sexual abuse is their own lived experience. And it's our job to continue to do good, to try to eradicate this and to try to create a space where the survivors of sexual abuse feel just as safe and feel just as embraced as half the people that get accused of these crimes who are fully embraced by their communities.
What are some of the basics of creating safe spaces, and what are the benefits of safe spaces?
Well, tell me what you mean by that. Tell me what you mean by creating safe spaces when you
that's
think
really
of
my
it.
question, because to me, it means somewhere where people can show up and be honest and feel loved and feel respected, not feel like they have to put anything on. But that's a tall ask.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, go ahead.
Like, how do you convey all of that to someone when you're first meeting them without saying it out loud?
Well, I think that okay, so let's narrow it down to, how do we create safe spaces when it comes to sexual abuse, right? How do we create safe spaces when it comes to people who have been victimized or survived? And I use those two words because different people like different words, right? Some people prefer victim and some people prefer survivor, and some people prefer neither, and even just being aware of language matters. I think when it comes to creating a safe space, it's about acknowledging and recognizing that we don't know each other's stories. When you walk into a room, you don't know someone's story. You don't know what they've been through. You don't know what they've had to navigate. You don't know where they've struggled and where they've thrived, if they've ever had the experience of thriving. And so because each person is a complex person, when we think about what it means to create a safe space, I think we have to be okay not having the answer to everything. When someone gets accused of a crime, like sexual abuse against children, most of the time, especially within, let's say, faith-based communities, okay?
Very vague term.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, right? Especially when it comes to faith-based communities, people's immediate knee-jerk reaction is no way. Like, there's no way, right? I want, you don't have to say it, but I want you to think, have you ever been in a situation where you know of someone that's been arrested for a crime against a child or sexual abuse, where you know of someone personally, whether it was in a school or in a summer camp or in your community? Like, most people know of someone that has had some sort of allegation made against them. And most of us have this knee-jerk reaction of like, there's no way that could have happened. And what I ask people when we think about creating a safe space is to take a step back for a second. Okay, I don't know the two of you that well, right? At all. We met clearly 4 years ago. We're meeting again today. But my assumption is you want to do good in this world, right? If you saw somebody sexually abusing a child, would you stop them?
Of course.
100%. Just like if someone pulled out a gun, or if there was, God forbid, somebody that was like hurting someone in the street, right? Or doing something horrific. If it was staring you in the face, you would stop them, right? People who sexually abuse kids are not going to do it in a way, and are not going to act in a way that automatically makes you see them for who they are. In order to sexually abuse a kid, you have to have access to kids. So if it's outside of a home environment, and much sexual abuse happens inside of a home environment, but if it's outside of a home environment, in order to have that access to kids, you've got to be good with kids. And you've got to fly under everybody's creepy radar, because most people in 2025 would look at somebody who's acting highly inappropriately with a kid and would intercede in some way. So in order for someone to get away with that, they have to hide underneath the fact that you're not aware of anything, you're never going to see it, and you're going to exist in what we call this cognitive dissonance. Like your reality in seeing somebody is the interactions you have had. You don't see what you don't want to see because you can't even fathom that somebody would do this to someone.
It's terrifying.
Right. So
It's
when
actually very terrifying.
Yeah, it is pretty terrifying. But when you think about the question of creating a safe space, if all you did was kind of process that and realize that if an allegation came out and somebody is saying, this was done to me, what if you paused and stopped and said, I believe you? Or what if you paused and stopped and just paused and you said in your mind, I have no idea what happened. What I know is that no one wants to be the person who comes out and says, I was sexually abused by this person, especially in faith-based communities where there's so much stigma that's still attached, where people are not likely to believe survivors, where the person that is doing this is probably someone that is beloved or well-liked in a million different ways. So you ask the question of, how do you create safe spaces? And you say, this is kind of terrifying, but I want you to think about it. It's not like a simple thing to create a safe space. It's about recognizing that there's so much that we don't know, but putting survivors first means being able to recognize we are not going to know if somebody is doing this because the pathology behind it is they want you not to believe it.
I feel like this is kind of true. I was in a faith-based place thingy, and they had to do a questionnaire, sexual something questionnaire. I don't know. You probably know what it is better than I do. And they gave it to all the students. And we were filling it out. I don't even know who to go to if I break my nose.
Right.
So I don't even know who to go to if I was sexually abused or saw something. And it's like, who would you go to? So I'm like, I guess I'd go to this guy. And then I'm like thinking about it, and we're just joking around. Like, what would he say? He would probably say, I'm sure it was a misunderstanding. I'm sure, like, I would put money that his response would be, like, let me look into this.
Right.
But I'm sure it's probably not right.
Right.
And that was scary to me. Like,
Right.
there was a lot that could go wrong here.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think about the concept of safe spaces is so multifaceted, right? There's a lot of nuance attached to it. What does that mean? In what context? In what year we're living in? With what is happening in the world? But I think when it comes to this topic, people still don't want to talk about it. It is so still taboo. I think we're getting better. I think we're getting better at bringing in people who can speak about this. I think we're getting better about raising awareness. I think we're getting better about talking about this on podcasts and saying, like, we're not going to shy away from tough topics. But it doesn't mean that when it kind of like hits you in the face, that in your own world, in your own community, in your own whatever it might be, a school, camp, et cetera, that you aren't going to be faced with a choice of how to act and what to do.
So my question is, you use the term cognitive dissonance. It makes it sound like there are things that we're seeing that we're compartmentalizing. So are there patterns that you're picking up when you walk into a room that I'm not picking up? Or
can you sniff out whoever?
I can't.
You said two things here. You said they're hiding the details, obviously, because no one wants to know about it. They don't want anyone else to know about it. And there's also, we don't have the framework for understanding those patterns when we see them. So is there anything that we could look for?
So I think I always say it like this, like, life is not an episode of Law & Order SVU, right? Like, it's just not.
There's no iced tea.
There's no, I wish there was. Like, it would have been great when I was a prosecutor if there was, because it would have been like really entertaining. But the truth is, life is not like an episode of TV. You can't just like walk into a room and just sense if there's somebody that's like doing something. I think that that's this myth that exists that I kind of alluded to before, of almost this like creepiness factor. We kind of think that we would just be able to tell. Like if I walk into a room and somebody's acting in a super creepy manner, like I'd be able to tell.
Like he looks like
Totally.
Yeah.
Or she, right?
Okay.
Because sexual abusers are not just male, right? So you have like exactly.
I only think of
there
men
are,
as people that would do that.
There are very well-known, both pedophiles as well as sexual abusers that are women. I prosecuted my share of women as well. I mean, the reality is that that's another myth that exists, which kind of serves as a barrier for stopping us from seeing when something is really harmful. But I think this idea that we think we would just know that we could walk into a room and just sense it is actually something that stops us from seeing behavior when it's really concerning. Because there's no litmus test of a creepiness factor. And I want you to think about it logically. Like think about what I said before. If you walked into a room and someone was being creepy with someone, what would you do in 2025? Like you'd probably tell someone, right? Like you would be able to identify it because it was obvious. And so instead, what we do is kind of end the session. I think that you sat through from me 4 years ago was all about boundaries, because what we know is that people who engage in sexual abuse, for the most part, engage in this process called grooming, which is essentially this steady breakdown of boundaries that's meant to create connection with a kid for the purpose of being able to get away with sexual abuse. And so what we've done is we've kind of identified that the red flags of grooming behavior are really all about boundaries. And so when you think about it, in any child-facing place, and this is why I say this until I'm like blue in the face, quite literally, do a boundaries training. Set your boundaries. What are your boundaries in how people can connect with kids, how people can engage with kids? Boundaries are your best roadmap, because
These are boundaries for yourself or for like a
no,
company,
for an
a
entity,
family?
for an entity. So like a summer camp. A summer camp should set the boundaries that exist between staff and campers and how to build connection within those boundaries, like not being alone with a camper in a place where you're not observable to other people and you're not interruptible to other people, like emotional boundaries and talking to staff about the difference between like hero worship and the savior complex and cultivating this idea of like it's me and a kid against the world versus being in a position where you understand that you could have a kid that like kind of thinks you're the most amazing person in the world, and how you as a staff member don't want to cultivate that idea of I'm the only hero of their story. Right? So there are different types of boundaries. There are physical boundaries. There are social media and electronic communication boundaries. There are all different sets of boundaries that can exist in any entity, whether it's like a summer program, a school, a sports organization, an extracurricular thing, anywhere where there are kids. And when you focus on saying these are the boundaries within our entity, then when you walk into a space and you're there for a few weeks, and you see someone is consistently crossing a boundary, consistently putting a kid on their lap when there's not supposed to be any lap sitting, all of a sudden you can look at that behavior and say, oh, that crosses a boundary. I should bump that up. That's the terminology I use for reporting. Like I should bump that up, right? I should make sure that somebody is aware of that. And what that does is it creates a non-scary awareness of the red flags of grooming behavior from the perspective of something every person can understand, because we all have our own personal boundaries, and boundaries are not a scary word to think about.
These are boundaries for ourselves, like ourselves, companies, people.
No, I would say
What about
each
like
entity.
for
Yeah.
the kids themselves?
I think that you have to start with recognizing that protecting kids from abuse is the job of the adults. That doesn't mean that
So
you
the first
are
layer of
the
defense.
first layer. Yeah.
That's what's causing
like,
it. Okay.
like, no, I mean, I'm
Get it
a
from the roots.
parent, right? I've had every awkward conversation with all of my children who are of varying different ages. And the reality is that talking to kids about abuse is about giving them tools for their toolbox. But you don't build a house with a toolbox. You don't like give someone a hammer and a screwdriver and say, could you go build a house, right? There are a lot of different people that are a part of structuring a house, from an architect to a contractor to a builder to an engineer. And those are people that have a lot of experience and a lot of education and who understand how things fit together. So giving kids information about abuse prevention, about consent is absolutely vastly important. And there are so many ways you can talk to kids starting at like toddlerhood up until when they're adults. But it's not a kid's responsibility to keep themselves safe from abuse. It's the grown-ups around them. So like you can't say to a kid, keep yourself safe, and then not ask the questions of their school or of their camp, what do you do to keep my kids safe?
There were two things from hearing you on a couple podcasts and articles and even in this discussion that stood out to me. One was when you're talking to kids to say, we use the word surprise, not secret. I think that's just such a good frame. And the other one is that no healthy adult needs approval from kids, needs their attention. Can you go further into those and just explain how you got them, what the benefits are?
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? When I talked before about the red flags of grooming behavior, we know that people who groom children use secrets to silence them. And they're not like big, heavy secrets, right? Most kids would be aware that if someone says, I have like a gun, like a kid would be like, that's scary and that's a very big deal. And maybe I should tell somebody about that, right? Or if a kid like tells another kid, like, I want to tell you a secret, like I have a bomb, right? Like a kid would be like, I think I'm supposed to tell someone, right? Heavy secrets, scary secrets, the kind that make people go like, right? Those are the ones that like kids are more likely to share. But people who groom children use secrets as boundary crossing behaviors. Like, I'm going to give this to you. But like, you don't need to tell your like mom and dad, right? Like we could just keep this between us, right? Or like, here, have a lollipop. You're totally awesome. But like, I don't want to give one to anybody else. So like, let's just keep this between us. And part of it is a litmus test.
I hate that tone of voice.
Right?
I hate it.
Right. I know. I have that effect on people. But like, part of it's a litmus test for that person who's like trying to figure out, can I get this kid to keep even little secrets, right? Because if I can both get them to keep little secrets, then all of a sudden an abuser might realize that child is more able to keep secrets of a varying different degree. What it also does is it creates a connection between that child and that abuser who's probably masking as somebody that cares about kids, right? So like I always say, people are like, well, how could this educator also be an abuser? And I'm always like, no, they're an abuser who's masking as an educator. Let's get the terminology right. Like, let's get the framing right? They don't actually care about children in the way that you would assume an educator would. They care about what it is that they want to be able to do, and they're using education as a platform to mask their behavior.
It's really that deep? Like it really goes, their whole life is about abusing kids?
I mean, I don't want to generalize because there are different pathologies with people who engage in this behavior, and I'm not a mental health professional, and that's not my area of expertise. But I would argue and say that if you want to sexually abuse a kid, then you really don't care about education in the way that real educators do.
You're a pretty poor one.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. And to kind of go back to the question that you asked, or the phrasing of secrets versus surprises, one of those red flags of that really inherently dangerous behavior is secrets. And so it's hard to say to a kid, like, never keep a secret, right? Because kids in general will share secrets with each other. That's part of friendship and growing up and being developmentally appropriate. And so we say two different things. We say no healthy grown-up needs you to keep a secret for them, period. No healthy grown-up needs you to keep a secret for them.
He would be the worst person to keep a secret with.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the second thing is teaching them the difference between a secret and a surprise, because a surprise will always have an ending and a secret doesn't have an ending. And no healthy grown-up needs you to keep a secret for them. And when you think about it, those are two things that you can teach kids the same way you teach them the ABCs and the same way you teach them their colors. It's not scary to say that. And then you like teach them the difference between a secret and a surprise. Like, okay, so if we're gonna make like a birthday party for grandma, is that a surprise? Like, we don't wanna tell her, but is that a surprise or a secret, right? And you actually practice this. It's a skill set with kids. And you say, oh, it's a surprise because when the party comes on Sunday, grandma's gonna know about it. She might not love it, but she's gonna know about it. And you use that in your everyday experience with kids. That's a tool. That's a tool for kids to be able to say, oh, wait a second, 3 years from now, someone's asking me to keep a secret. That raises my own internal red flag. I'm more likely to tell a person that I see as safe that this is happening.
Back to camp, because out of all these experiences, I've probably been a counselor like 5 years of my life. And for a lot of people, the challenge is, how do I get kids to listen to me? And it's not even so much I want to be able to do this thing to them. It's I have 25 kids and I'm like 15 years old and trying to get them to do what I say. If I give them a candy and don't tell anyone, because I would get in trouble if I give them a candy, then like they'll start listening to me. So it sounds like part of what you're saying is, even though it feels like that behavior isn't damaging in itself, that's a behavior that'll lead to enabling actual predators, actual abusers.
Yeah, I think it's a behavior that if we curb and we think of creative solutions, having been a camp counselor also myself and knowing how tough being a camp counselor can be.
Brutal.
It's brutal. It's the one job that like if you can survive it and thrive at it, you could do anything. Like I'm like a firm believer in camp in that way.
You're getting like $5 an hour.
You are making absolutely nothing. No one is at camp for the money. No,
crazy.
Totally not. But the truth is that what it is doing is exactly what you said. It's enabling this idea that like this behavior is okay. So if somebody came along who wasn't you and who was really badly intended and was looking for an opportunity, it's a perfect opening for them because that's something that those campers expect. So like instead, what we need to realize is, yeah, being a camp counselor is super tough. And when you have 25 or 27 kids in your bunk and they are bouncing off the walls and like nobody wants to sleep and you're exhausted because you are working 9 days a week for 30 hours a day and it feels like no matter how many times you shower, you're never gonna get clean, right? Like camp is a unique experience. Part of what you have to do as a camp is be able to train your staff to say, this is how you navigate this. This is how you use creative solutions within boundaries to be able to engage with kids and get their attention. Don't go off on your own and offer secretive gifts. I just came off of 3.5 weeks of training staff at camps all across the country. And one of the biggest kind of takeaways for me is that when a camp is doing this kind of training, they are looking to set an example for their staff in order for their staff to set an example for these campers. Because if everybody grew up in a world where they understood these boundaries, maybe people would be more likely to speak up. Maybe.
And it seems like the reason I want to like double tap on this is before this conversation, I had such a sense of powerlessness. This is all just stuff I can't see, stuff I can't do anything about. And even in situations where I don't know if it was your rule, if it was from some other camp's boundaries that they had, it was not to touch a kid under the shoulders. And there would be times where like we're playing basketball and the kid wants to dunk. They want to dunk in the hoop and it would be so fun for them if you just pick them up and they get to dunk. And it's like, why can't I do that? And at the time, the reasoning in my head was because it would be risky. Because someone could take a picture of it and then some other person could be doing it now. Someone gets a picture taken of them. And now that kid could go to court and they could accuse you of doing something and they'd have evidence now. When now that's not the reason at all. The reason is because now someone else will be able to do that and no red flags will be raised because of it.
People are really worried about this idea, like how you just phrased it. It almost like you knew you couldn't do it because there was an anxiety, like, what if I'm accused of something and then all of a sudden I'm arrested? Like, I just want to remind everybody that like people don't just randomly get arrested for like touching someone on the shoulder on a basketball court, right? Like everybody kind of needs to be able to take a deep breath. And I think the reframing of that is, of course, we don't want to create the appearance of something improper happening, right? What I call the appearance of impropriety. But also we're doing this to be able to set a model so that, just like what you said, if someone did come along and was looking for opportunities to kind of push those boundaries, you'd be more likely to notice it. Like instead of being worried about somebody accusing you of something because you touch someone on the shoulder when they're like trying to make a, when they're trying to make a basket and then all of a sudden someone's getting arrested. Like, that's not actually how law enforcement works. And also, we have a greater responsibility. And the concern about allegations or appearances of impropriety lessen when you're in a situation where you start to engage in real behaviors that showcase when someone is really not safe. So like, I kind of wish that every staff member of every camp would take a deep breath and would realize I'm doing this so that I can like set these boundaries for the greater good. Like there is something that has to do with the greater good.
It's so much more empowering because at the time, and a lot of people would just break the rules because they're like, I know I'm a good person. I would never do that. And no one's going to take a picture. So we're good now.
Or you'd be like, the only person getting me in trouble is the camp.
Right.
Like the kids don't actually care. I know the parents. It's not a big deal. Like the same person that would pick up, if another person would pick up that kid to get that dunk, took a picture, they'd be like, wow, what a great counselor.
Right.
He's so good with kids. It could be perceived both ways.
Right.
So you never know who's viewing you, who's judging you right now.
Totally. But also there's something greater than you. It's not about you. And I say this to staff all the time, especially in camps, like if there was a concern that you weren't safe to engage with kids, like you wouldn't be sitting in the room with me right now, right? Like you wouldn't have been hired if there was a worry that you were not safe. Let's start off from the baseline of making an assumption that you are. What are we doing as a community, as a collective group to ensure that nobody does something like this in my camp? I still remember when I was like a young counselor or a young staff member many years ago, I was working in a camp and one of the heads of the camp had this phrase that really resonated with me throughout my entire professional career. And he basically said, I want you to walk around this camp and say, this is my camp.
The owner of the camp.
Not the owner. I wasn't a privately owned camp. I was in a camp that was more of a nonprofit, right? But the one of the heads, one of the director type people would basically said to staff, I want you to walk around the camp and I want you to have the approach of, this is my camp. This is my camp. I don't want something awful to happen in my camp. I don't want people to be throwing garbage in my camp. Like, I want people to have joy and safety and awesomeness. This is my camp. I am as responsible for this camp as that person and as that person. And if you flip a switch and you say, it's not about like being worried that someone's gonna accuse me of something I didn't do, but it's actually about my looking at the space that I'm in and saying, I am just as responsible for what happens here as anybody else. What am I doing to create a safe space? Not to bring it back to the first question.
And it's really a privilege. You can save lives by just not
100%
picking the kid up.
So like maybe you're not going to save a life by not picking the kid up per se, but what you're doing is when the kid's like, can you pick me up? And you're like, actually, I can't because we have certain boundary rules here. And though, I may not be able to explain all of them, I just know that they're really important. But also like, you can do this.
And that's educating the kid also.
Yeah. And it's like showing the kid that you can actually set a boundary without being weird or scary or like annoyed about it or like you think it's stupid, right? A lot of this is about the little ripple effects. And I'm a big believer in that.
At this point in my life, I'm not in camps anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not a camper. I'm not a counselor.
Yeah.
Now
you and me both, by the way. Yeah.
Amazing. It's a good spot to be in.
Thank God. But we dodged it.
It's mostly workplace and family now.
Yeah.
So where would you start? Let's go workplace first. What are some things to look for?
It depends on the workplace, right? Like I think that there's a difference between a child-facing workplace and a workplace where you're interacting with just adults. There are different issues in those types of workplaces, right? A child-facing place, you want to make sure that if you're working in a place that also has kids there, that there are policies and procedures in place, that there's really good training, that there's an understanding of all forms of abuse, that there's an understanding of like how kids can also engage in really unsafe behavior with kids. Like there are a lot of different layers to that. In a workplace without children, you want a safe space for everyone. And that's where the phrase sexual harassment comes in, right? That's the idea of, and I'm going to simplify it because every state and country has actually a different definition of sexual harassment. So like I can't give you a set standard one.
How different does it get?
In Israel, sexual harassment can connote abuse. Right here in America, sexual harassment is typically, and I'm saying typically because every state is different, you can have a crime of harassment, which is dealt with in the criminal system. But a lot of times when we're referring to sexual harassment in the workplace, we're talking about unwelcome or unwanted conduct of a sexual nature, or that's directed at someone because of their sex or their gender or their identity, and it's a form of discrimination. So that's something that would be in the civil realm.
Like
so
I have a friend who works at this big law firm.
Yeah.
There's this girl who comes in very, provocatively dressed. And one of the people was referring to this woman and said, have Barbie do it. And then she settled for $2 million.
Yeah.
Then apparently she has 16 companies that she settled with for being something, or for being a victim. So have you seen anything like that? Is you think that's a false story for my friends, or you think that's some people be overly sensitive to something?
So first of all, I can't actually opine on that particular story.
Yeah.
But what I can say is that sexual harassment is a form of essentially discrimination, and everybody has the right to be in their workplace without any form of discrimination happening. And sexual harassment, you have the right to exist in your workplace, to function in your workplace, to work in your workplace without ever having to deal with any type of unwelcome or unwanted, either conduct of a sexual nature or that's directed at you because of your sex or gender or identity. And so what that means is that you have two types of sexual harassment. We don't need to go into like the nitty-gritty details, but one is called quid pro quo and one is called a hostile work environment. And when it comes to creating that hostile work environment, the thought is, first of all, you shouldn't have to be in a position where you're in your workplace and you ever get unwelcome or unwanted comments that are directed at you in some sort of sexual way. Nobody should have to work in their workplace and have to deal with that. And when it comes to assessing whether something is sexual harassment, and I want to be really clear, I'm simplifying this. Every state is different. Every country is different.
You know all the law stuff.
No, I mean, but I do a lot of trainings on sexual harassment. But a big piece of understanding it is that it's viewed from the eyes of how the person experienced it. And then there's kind of a second piece of the analysis, which is it reasonable in that workplace for that to happen? So like an example would be, if you are working in an ER, there is a good chance that there will have to be somebody that you at some point will see a naked person, right? Because someone's clothing has to be torn off of them or ripped off of them, because your job is to make sure that people live and are safe. You are probably going to be exposed to parts of people's bodies that you wouldn't be exposed to if you worked in a law firm. So the question of like, yes, it's viewed from the eyes of the way the person is experiencing it. And that means you can have someone who like you might consider to be too sensitive, but it doesn't really matter. Like that's not part of the analysis if someone's too sensitive. But then is it reasonable in that same workplace, in that same social context, for that behavior to happen?
Gotta follow the flow of traffic.
Right. So like it's not reasonable to walk into a conference room in a law firm and see a naked person on the conference table. That would not be reasonable. That would be a form of sexual harassment. But in an ER, that would not be a form of sexual harassment. So there's a lot of complexity to this. And there's a lot of nuance to this. And sometimes when people tell the stories or retell the stories of what they saw or experienced from someone else's lawsuit or allegation, what you lose is you don't know how it felt. You don't know what it felt like to be in your workplace as a professional and to be told or treated or spoken about in that way. Why should I walk into a workplace and because I'm of a particular gender, why does someone get to comment on my body or my clothing? Right? There are actually laws that protect us in our workplaces. So that's a lot of the nuance attached to it.
It's not really sexual. It's more of being a different sex and you're objectifying that person?
It can be both. Actually, different states have different laws. Like in New York, they expanded the definition of sexual harassment to include unwelcome and unwanted conduct that's either of a sexual nature or that's being directed at someone because of their sex or gender or identity. In other states, it might just be about unwelcome sexual conduct. And then there's an assessment that's made, like, is this unwelcome? Is this sexual conduct? It's complex.
Like if I put a sign on the studio saying no girls allowed.
Yeah, that would be sexual harassment.
Even
in
though
New
it's
York.
not even sexual.
Hands down, it's directed at someone because of their sex, gender, or identity. Now, if you were saying no women allowed because you have a group of men that are, I'm trying to think of like a particular situation.
Praying.
Maybe in other words, like during prayer times, please respect, like this is a house of worship. During prayer times, please respect X, Y, and Z. That may not be a form of sexual harassment, right? It's reasonable in a house of worship that you have certain worships done in certain ways, right? So like it's all an analysis based on what's in front of you.
Without the legal side of it, let's say in this studio, we just want people to feel welcome and we want to make sure that it's a place where no one can be hurt or abused.
Right.
What boundaries would you recommend we set?
Well, can I give an example from the prep
Yeah.
that we did?
Yes, please.
You're like, maybe we'll cut this out. I don't know.
We can always cut.
Okay. Is that you came up with like a variety of different questions. One of the best things that you can do and what you actually did was you sent them to me in advance. And by the way, I don't even think we've gotten to half of those questions. And it's not like we prepared a script. You were just like, here are the things we're thinking. And you gave me the time to turn back to you and say, I wouldn't ask a question like this because if survivors are listening, that could feel a way that you don't intend it to feel. And what you did is you heard that. You were like, then we would not ask it that way. Like, how can we engage in this conversation and make it as safe for our listeners as possible? That's what you did, right? You prepared and you used your curiosity, like you led with curiosity, and you led with curiosity in a way that allowed for good feedback. And then you didn't try to like bait and switch. That's what it means to bring information like this to the public, to recognize that you might not be the experts in this, but you are leading with the curiosity to be able to bring this information to others in a way that is beneficial and helpful and hopefully changes lives. So like, that's an example.
Because that's very specific to this, and I know I use the studio as an example.
You did, I answered the question.
Because I'm looking for something more like that rule of not touching a camper under the shoulders. At the time, to me, felt like a crazy rule, but in hindsight, makes so much sense.
Right.
And I want something like that just for life, the world.
For life. I don't know that I can give that to you. I don't know I don't think it works that way, but I think you have to think about, like also there is no hack for this. You have to think about the stage of life you're in and the stage of where you are. So let me give you an example. If you bring your podcast at some point into a place where kids are on your podcast, or like you go into a place where kids join your podcast, or you have kids that are asking you for selfies or like to be in their TikToks or something like that, you want to actually really think about the boundaries when it comes to engaging with minors on social media.
That happens a lot because we have a food account on Instagram and TikTok. A lot of those kids are like, we filmed at a high school one time, just a regular content shoot.
Right.
And all these kids were like, can we take a picture?
Right.
Which is very nice, but also.
Totally. And you want to think about it. So like, let's say, nowadays, like things are pretty public. I'm sure if a kid wanted to get your information on WhatsApp, they probably could. So let's say a kid then after the podcast reaches out to you and texts you. That should be like a block. Like we don't engage with minors, right? Like that's not something that we would do in that way.
Even a text message.
I wouldn't. Why would you be texting with a minor?
One example is from a shoot we did.
Yeah.
And there were kid actors in the shoot.
Okay.
Which I think is fine as far as I know. But then they're like, can you send me the footage? Send me the video when it's up, when it's done.
So,
I'm like, maybe I'll send one link to them.
So what I would do is, that's a great example of like transparency in numbers, what we call like the rule of 3. Instead of you texting that kid directly one-on-one, put the two of you on a WhatsApp group with that kid, say, hey, we're sending you the footage. We, not me.
So you're saying don't respond to that text, make it a group chat.
Yeah.
And then, okay.
Yeah, like in other words, when you think about it, so let's say that kid who's a child actor is like on a photo shoot or on some sort of movie shoot and it's 3:00 in the morning. And because they're doing a night shoot, like they're like, oh, you know what? I forgot. Let me just text you and ask for that stuff. So now all of a sudden you who maybe have insomnia, you receive a text from like a 14-year-old at 3:00 in the morning and you respond, right? What does that look like? What does that tell that 14-year-old about being able to engage with adults? Like, should an adult be texting with them at 3:00 in the morning? Probably not.
Well, part of it is, let's say I was 18 at the time. This was pretty recent.
Right.
So I was 22.
Right.
But if it's an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, the bridge is not so big. It's not so crazy to be texting someone like, yo, can you just send me that thing? And I'm like, maybe.
Right, except the bridge is pretty big when it comes to anything that spans into then the legal realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like
You're protecting yourself, like what you were saying.
yeah, on some level, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're also setting a boundary like, oh, I'm 19 years old, I'm 18 years old, I'm an adult. I'm legally an adult, not in every state, but in most states, right? So like, I'm legally an adult, you're a kid, and though you, child, may actually look older than me or act older than me, you're still a minor, and there are still boundaries that exist.
Is that the message you would give them at the same time? Because you mentioned before with the just not doing the thing with the kid and the basketball hoop, just not picking them up isn't going to do the job. You also have to explain to them what that boundary is that you're setting. Would you say something here, also make that group chat and say, by the way, the reason I would never do that is because
I actually wouldn't make it about you. I would make it about your policies. Our policies on this podcast are always that like whenever we're engaging with minors, we do it as a group. It's not about you.
So you wouldn't explain why it's helping them, why it's protecting them.
I don't think that you explaining why it's protecting them is the best thing to be doing with a minor when you're dealing with like the context that you gave it, right? Because like, imagine where that goes. You'd be like, I am not texting you because if I were a sexual abuser, I would then potentially text. That is, no, like that is not how we create.
But it might be weird to just say like, since you're a minor, I'm not texting you.
You could actually just say.
It's like, why you gotta be weird about it?
Well, I don't think you have to be weird about it. What makes it weird?
Just make a group chat and then send it there without saying anything.
You could do that.
Well, I'm not saying, I thought before you said with the basketball hoop that you should tell the kid,
I think
and that's
can.
not okay. Other counselors should not be doing
I think
that.
you can tell the kid. I think it all depends on the context of what's happening and what's happening. Let you use that context of the basketball hoop in camp. I think all kids should know what the boundaries are in camp. They're not your particular boundaries. They're the camp's boundaries. I think in the first 24, 48 hours, like the camp director should be getting up and being like, hey, FYI, or the division head should be getting up in that division and saying, hey, FYI, there are certain boundaries that we have. If you have questions about them, you let us know, right? Like it's about transparency. So it's not about you being like a maverick and having to like save the world by telling every child what a boundary is. It's more about where are you? What are the boundaries in place in that place? And I think the question you asked was, when we think about the boundaries in this workplace, like what could we do to make it safer? And I definitely think that from the perspective of interactions with minors, you want to at least set consistent boundaries, especially with social media and electronic communication, so that it's consistent.
So all this talk about abuse, we were mostly focusing on the relationship between adults and minors.
Yeah.
Does it spill over into other areas of life and maybe relationships and even relationships that aren't with minors, maybe someone our own age?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, when I was a prosecutor, I actually started off in the Domestic Violence Bureau at the DA's office and then switched over to child abuse and sex crimes. But the reality is that you can absolutely have a sex crime happen within a marriage, within a dating relationship, right? You can have somebody rape somebody, you can have somebody sexually abuse someone or sexually assault someone. A relationship is not an automatic, I get to do whatever it is that I want. And I think we also don't talk about this enough, that like just because you're in a relationship with someone, that you want to be in or that both people want to be in, it doesn't mean you don't still need consent in the way that you're interacting with each other sexually and like intimately, etc.
Do you need to like verbally say it? Like, what's the line? Like, because
Well,
I feel like
yeah.
that's where it gets tricky, like what you're saying.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it like this, and this is like a little bit of a simplification because every state is different and every crime is different. But in order to have something be good and positive or safe and positive is probably a better way of putting it versus something that could be considered a crime. A sex act that's a crime is a sex act with no consent. And no consent can be a variety of different things. So if you have a sex act and someone's a minor, minors can't give legal consent. That's a crime. If you have a sex act and someone is sleeping and someone tries to engage in some sort of sexual act with them while they're sleeping, or they're passed out or they're incapacitated, they lack consent and there's a sex act, that's a crime, right? If you have a situation where somebody is forced into doing something, they're held down, they're like literally not, whether it's with a weapon or with someone's body or in some other way, that means that all of a sudden there was force that was used where there was no consent and a sex act. So the reason why I say it that way is because you can have a relationship that is built on very consensual interactions, very consensual sexual interactions, and that doesn't mean that you can't have something that turns out to be not consensual, right? There is in a relationship, in a healthy relationship, you have to talk about these things. You have to actually express what you're comfortable with. And you also have to be comfortable saying to your partner, like, I was comfortable with this, but I'm just not comfortable with this right now. Or like, this is something that maybe I'm not as comfortable with. And you have to have a partner that respects that. It doesn't mean that you're not going to engage in conversation or that you're not going to engage in awkward conversation or that especially at the beginning of a relationship, it isn't going to be like a little bit weird to have this conversation. But in the history of forever, I have never heard somebody ever say to me, like it was such a bad relationship because the person respected me so much. Like that sucked.
I have a weird question.
Yeah.
If you're building up that respect and you're building up that trust, how is that any different than grooming?
Because it's a consensual relationship between two adults, right? Grooming is about an abuser.
The kid can't give consent.
So technically speaking, kids can't give consent, which brings up a whole other issue, which I don't know that we're going to actually talk about on the podcast of like, what happens if you have two 15-year-olds who believe they're in a consensual relationship? We're going to table that for another time.
It's a little weird one.
It's a hard one, and every state treats it differently. Because when you're dealing with two adults that can both legally consent, you're dealing with two adults who are developing a relationship. When you're dealing with grooming, the way that we talked about it and defined it, it's about an abuser who like uses a vulnerability or creates a vulnerability in a kid and uses this steady breakdown of boundaries to gain their trust to be able to abuse them. And kids can't consent.
What about other situations like at this point, some of my friends are having kids.
Yeah.
And that kid could be running around.
Totally.
Is it your job to like take care of them? Are you not allowed to take care of them? If
you are
go
always
over and don't
allowed.
ask
Or
for
the kid could be
permission?
running around naked.
Always. Well, also remember, it's not sexual abuse for you to change your kid's diaper or give your kid a bath. There's no sexual gratification that's attached to that. If there is, that could be a form of sexual abuse, right? There are people who create horrific child sexual abuse materials with young kids, and that is a crime. That is a huge crime and a really serious crime. But just taking care of your child, changing them, giving birth to them, making sure that they're taken care of. You're gonna see your child naked. That is the nature of parenting. And I think if you asked any parent, they would say that to you. No, you don't have to hesitate to care for your child. What you want to do as a parent is make sure that you're both engaging with your kid at age-appropriate levels and doing things that help give them tools. And you want to make sure that when you put them in child-facing places, the people that are caring for them are safe as well.
Well, what about other people's kids?
Yeah.
So, and we could be talking about other family members' kids. We could be talking about friends' kids. We could be talking about at some public event.
Yeah.
And it's some random person's kid.
Right.
What do we do there?
I think as an adult, and I see this all the time, like obviously I do a lot of public speaking, I do a lot of training. I also have children, they have friends. People are not so scared of me that like my kids don't have their friends
You would
over.
be the one that would sue your friends.
No suing.
Gotcha.
But like, I think that a big piece of this is being able to understand that how adults interact with kids matter. They matter. And there are going to be times, I mean, you have your nieces or your nephews or grandchildren or like your closest family friends, the people you would call in an emergency and their children, like kind of what we call in our world, like, you know, your second set of children, right? The people that you would be their emergency call.
Godfather.
Right. Or,
I love that term.
You know, like anything like that. I think a big piece of understanding it is that boundaries are still going to exist in some way and should in every family. Like, I wouldn't hesitate to go over to a friend of mine's house to care for their kids if they needed to run to the hospital with one of their children. But what would I not do? I wouldn't climb into bed with one of their children, right? Like, in other words, there are certain boundaries that I think need to exist within any type of interaction. So like a good example is your really close family friends, like their kids probably shouldn't be sitting on your lap. Right? Like that should be...
That's not taken for granted. That's a lot of people do that.
Right. So like when you think about it, you're like, okay, but what about if it's a baby or what about if it's a toddler? I would say that's very different. Like you're holding a baby, you're holding a toddler versus like a 7-year-old, right? If it's an age of a child that doesn't need to sit on a lap in order to be able to eat or to be able to like, you know, they can't sit on their own, they can't, all of those things are things that you want to think about. And they're not hard and fast rules. But I do think that one of the reasons why we want to think about that is because we hear time and time again about situations, and we know this, where the majority of sexual abuse that happens to kids happens and is being done by people that their family actually knows or that is a member of their family. And so part of what we do is we raise awareness. Like if there's someone that continuously is over at your house and wants to take your 9-year-old and have them sit on their lap, that should raise a red flag to you. A 9-year-old doesn't need to sit on a neighbor's lap.
What do you do?
Right?
What do you do?
Oh, what would I do?
Yeah.
Or like, what should anybody do?
Both. Because
Okay.
like, let's say you see someone just, you love my kid too much. You're not
yeah.
her mom. You're not.
Yeah, I've had that happen before where I've had somebody like offer one of my kids or two of my kids, you know, things and like, don't tell your parents. And I would go over to the adult and I would say, we don't do that. And then I sit in silence just a little bit, which is like a little bit scary and a little bit intimidating. We don't do that. I don't walk over and yell or scream. I think there's a lot of power in how you use your voice and your body language. We don't do that here. And then I think you can take a bunch of different approaches. One approach could be, we don't do that because that's actually something that we would consider not to be a safe behavior. I'm sure you didn't mean it. I appreciate that you are willing to take the feedback. Thank you so much. And then you've set a boundary, and then you kind of are in this situation where if the person tries to cross it again, that should be a huge signal to you that they don't get it and like maybe they're not safe to be around your kid.
I feel like from you, that would be the scariest thing to hear.
But I have had to do that before. Like I have absolutely had to do that.
And if you did that to me, I'd feel like I'm getting sued if I get near that kid.
Or you would be like, maybe I don't want to do this again. Maybe I don't want to do that, right? A lot of times people do things and they have no ill intent. They're not trying to do something that's grooming. They don't realize it. They're creating the appearance of impropriety. But it's my job as an adult and as a parent, as nerve-wracking as it is, and it is, even when I've had to do that, my heart is beating and I'm like, oh my gosh, do I have to go do this? Do I have to go like confront someone? Even me, right? Rahel Bayar, who people are probably like, she probably confronts 1,000 people all the time. I don't, right? My heart is beating and I'm sweating a little bit and I'm saying to myself like, oh, I don't want to do this. But you know whose job it is to do that? It's my job.
You're the guardian.
I'm the parent. It's not my kid's job. And how am I ever going to teach my kid that they have the right to use their voice and speak up and all of the different aspects of what it means to be able to say no or to say yes if I, as their parent, see something concerning and I'm not willing to speak up? That's my role. That's part of what it means. You ask the question, or one of you asked the question of like, you have kids, you're like raising them. Like, what do you do? Well, it's your job to keep them safe. You would never throw them out in a snowstorm with like no boots and say, go hang out in the snow and not come back in ever, right? We would never take our kids and throw them in a swimming pool and not teach them how to swim and hope that they survive. Like, it's our job to teach them, but it's also our job to make sure the environment that they're in is safe. And so if I can't have a conversation with an adult saying, hey, that's just something we don't do here.
So in that same scenario, do you think it's telling the person what you're doing, I'm uncomfortable with it because I don't trust you inherently? Or is it telling them, I trust you completely, you would never do anything, but it's setting them up for something that could hurt them? Because to me, the first one, if you're telling someone who's very close to you and you love, I don't trust you with my kid.
I think it depends.
How are you supposed to say
I
that?
have definitely had situations with my own children's, let's say grandparents, right? Where like, especially when it's like, you have the first grandchild or like a second grandchild or something, where a grandparent would be like, I'm going to get you something special, but don't tell your ima, like don't tell your mom.
Such a grandfather thing to do.
Totally. And it doesn't mean that grandparent in any way is like negative or doing something. It's just what grandparents do.
These kids so happy, they get so excited.
But you know what's
so
like,
special.
but you know what's so great? Like the ability to go over to a grandparent and say, I need your help with something. I need your help. Because what grandparent doesn't like to be asked or need to be needed? I need your help. One of the things that we're doing is that we're teaching our kids that we don't want adults to try to ask them to do things that would be kept a secret from their parents. And I know it's such a natural thing as a grandparent to offer candy or gifts and not tell us, but we need your help. Can you, when you do something like that, can you actually phrase it differently? Because part of what we're trying to do is create the adults around our kids that are helping to also keep them safe. So if you instead use language like, okay, I'm getting you this stuffed animal. Of course, you can tell your parents, we don't keep secrets from our parents, but I want you to know it's special for you. That's it. Like if you could change the language that you're using, that would be so helpful. And to know that we have your partnership in raising our kids is a really beneficial thing. Grandparents, and it's genuine because it's true. You're not trying to catch someone. You're actually trying to create a dynamic around your kids of like, and I truly believe this, most people in the world are very safe and healthy and like only want the best of things. But when you're raising children, you need your people around you and you need to be able to communicate with them when there's a boundary that you have for your own kids. So it's not about putting someone on notice and saying, I think there's something wrong with you, so you can't give my kid sour sticks. It's not like that. It's actually about saying like, I need your help. And then they can rise up to that occasion. If it's somebody that is not well-intended, they will not rise up to that occasion, and then you'll be more likely to notice it.
With that same message, if the underlying belief is, I genuinely do not trust this person, I think every time that'll come through and they'll hear all the words, but they'll also hear, my kid does not trust me. My friend does not trust me.
If you do not trust a person around your children, why are they around your children?
So you do trust them?
Okay.
No, I'm asking because I'm trying to figure out.
I'm actually, because I want you to differentiate.
Scenario,
yeah.
And we're saying, I don't want you to be in this situation with my kid because I want to protect them. Or if it's trying to prevent enabling another scenario.
Here's the thing, with your own kids, I think you have to differentiate. Do you believe that the person in front of you is safe to be around your kids and can wash your kids and can watch your kids and help with your kids? And like you have nannies or you have babysitters, you have grandparents or you have friends. If you believe that that person is safe, you're bringing them into your safety circle and you're asking them to use similar terminology because you're broadening that safety circle. If you believe someone is not safe and you can't put your finger on why are they around your kids?
Yeah, 100%. Agreed.
I mean, I think, and by the way, you could have someone where over time you say to yourself, this is starting to not feel safe. So make a different choice. These are your kids. They're your kids. Like, you're literally raising humans, right? It's our job to make sure that they're protected in the right ways and that they seek independence in the right ways. So if you get to a point where you have to ask this question, and I've actually posted this on social media before, where like I've put out a post that says, if you have to ask the question, is this person safe to be around my kids? And you're thinking of all the different moments in time where you'd question their safety, then the answer is no. What are you waiting for?
The reason I brought it up in the first place is because I think a lot of people receive this message as there is something you think is wrong with me. When I don't think it's the intent, like you're saying, it's not the intention. If they're in your home, it means you trust them.
If you believe they're safe and they take it the wrong way, well, isn't that life? Like it's the ability to communicate about tough things, right? Like it's the ability to disagree and engage with curiosity and be able to communicate certain things. Like if you had somebody who walked into your house and like, I don't know, did something that you just never wanted in your house, like, okay, I'm like, let's think of an example, right? You have somebody that walks into your house and decides that even though they just walked through a mud like pit, they don't like to take their shoes off in your house and they're gonna walk all over your floor and carpet and track mud everywhere. Would you turn to them and be like, hey, buddy, could you just take your shoes off? Would that be okay? And if they're like, no, I viscerally disagree with this, like I don't wanna do that, be like, right, but do you see the mud on the floor? Like it's, maybe we could make let's think about just this time and then maybe next, like what could I do to make this more comfortable for you? You'd find a way to have a communication about this issue. Obviously, this is not the same as protecting your kid, but I think that a lot of times we hesitate to have tough conversations, even though it's something that could really impact the health and safety of our children and our home. When someone doesn't intend to do something that impacts you in a negative way or your children in a negative way, and you believe they're safe, you can find a way to bring them into that safety circle. And if they really can't take it and they will not listen and they don't believe that what you're saying is accurate, you're still in charge of the safety of your.
Last question. If we get a sense that someone has gone through something, or if we know that someone has gone through something, what is the right way of communicating with them and supporting them?
That's such a great question. And I'm not sure there's just one answer to it. Because everybody who experiences trauma or abuse may need something different. So I want to just acknowledge to everybody listening that this is a real generalization and may not apply to every single person who's gone through something. But I think you have to believe them. I think you have to be willing to believe them and to like publicly believe them. I think you have to be willing to say to someone like, I don't know exactly what you need in the situation, but I want you to know that I believe you. I think you have to be willing to not go to court for an abuser. I think you have to be willing to not go stand up and say this abuser is falsely accused. I think you need to, be in a position where if you have a friend or a loved one who is at the point where they've actually said that this was done to them, not that it happened to them, it was done to them, then you are in a position where you get to say to that loved one, like, I may not know exactly what you need, but I want you to know I believe you. And sometimes the simplest thing of just that real acknowledgement, the fact that they don't have to prove themselves, they don't have to give you all the nitty-gritty details, they don't have to like relive their trauma for the sake of your understanding it, can be a huge unlock and a huge way of being able to take a bit of a burden off of somebody.
Do you think it's ever the right thing to push for more information?
From a survivor?
Yeah.
No.
Always. Because, and the reason I'm saying that is I would think that sometimes people will close off and it can get to a point where you can't have as deep of a relationship with them because they just have experiences that are affecting their life in a very deep way that you can't.
So I want to kind of
Understand.
differentiate. Also remember, I'm not a mental health professional. So for everybody listening, please know I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a licensed mental health professional. I'm a lawyer. I'm an attorney. I'm a former prosecutor. What I would say to you is I think there's a difference between when you're in a relationship with someone that has survived a trauma and you need to navigate building that relationship. That's where like a really good licensed therapist might be able to help in having those conversations, because when someone's experienced any form of trauma, no matter what it is, that can be really hard to both open up and kind of engage in both a physically, but also like, you know, an emotionally intimate relationship. And so whatever help you need from a licensed professional to kind of get you to that place, I'm fully supportive of that avenue. What I was responding to is if somebody discloses to you, if somebody says to you, I need to share something with you, or I'm going to share something with you, or this was done to me, or this happened to me, to pry or to ask detailed questions may make that person feel like you need more information in order to believe it. So that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid, I need you to prove it to me. I need to know why you didn't run away, or why you didn't say no, or why you froze, or why you're just telling me this now when we've been friends for 15 years. Like those kind of accusatory questions, or questions that can feel accusatory, can be really damaging when somebody discloses abuse. So differentiate between I'm building a relationship and somebody has experienced trauma and I want to figure out a way to get to a place where it's not a barrier in our relationship. I would use a licensed mental health professional versus somebody is coming to me and sharing like, this happened to me. Like they don't owe you the story of what was done. You owe them the ability to meet them where they are and say, I believe you.
Really, one last thing this time. I feel like being on the other side of it, not really having gone through anything, knowing how many people have, it makes me sad to know that there are all these people walking around with it, people I've had relationships with that didn't feel safe enough to disclose it to me, that I never even knew about it.
Right.
Do you think with someone acting in a healthy way, they will find out about these things? Or is it almost ideal that you probably won't find out about it?
I think that when someone has had their ability to control what was done to them taken away, it's our job and kind of our responsibility to understand that like they have the right to share and disclose what was done to them in a way that feels safe for them. And it's not a mark of a bad relationship or a mark of like, you know, somebody not being able to like meet somebody where they are. It's not a negative mark in you that somebody didn't want to disclose something. But I want you to imagine like these are some of the potentially worst moments of their lives. People survive them in a variety of different ways. And I saw this all the time when I was a prosecutor. I get asked this question, not so much anymore, but I used to get asked this question a lot, which was like, do you know, like, are you in touch with any of the people whose cases, you know, the victims of the cases you prosecuted? And I'm not in touch with anyone. There's not a single person of all the probably thousands of cases I prosecuted. There's not a single person I get like a holiday card from or like get a yearly phone call from, because I know that my role as a prosecutor, when I was meeting with a victim or survivor or having them testify or having to go through just all of the different nitty-gritty aspects of a trial, like my face brings up the worst moments of their lives. My role is to recognize that and not to try to be their friend. I was the person that was seeking justice on their behalf. That's a very specific role.
Boundaries.
Yeah, and if I start to say, well, I wish that I knew X, or I wish someone had told me, or I wish this, or I wish, then it becomes about me and not about their trauma or their lived experience. And so as a professional in the field, I had to really learn what it was like to exist within someone's trauma, but not to live within their trauma, and to be able to have boundaries and to be able to separate it. And so what I would say to you is, people who experience this form of trauma, there are many people who navigate the aftermath of this in a variety of different ways. Some people don't talk about it for 70 years. Some people never talk about it. Some people will talk about it 20 years later. Some people can't find the words to be able to even share what was done or what happened to them. Some people, their bodies froze and they still believe that it was their fault. There are so many different aspects to this. And so I would just recognize that if you haven't been through something like this, it's really important to give the space and the respect and the care in the way that you know how to a person whose lived experience involves this.
Got it. Thank you so much for coming, for your time.
Thank you so much.
And
I feel like I
for
learned a lot.
Yeah. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much.
This was so informative. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.